Because understanding great literature is better than trying to read and understand yet another business book. On the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, we commit to reading, dissecting, and analyzing the great books of the Western canon. You know, those books, from Jane Austen to Shakespeare, and everything else in between, that you might have fallen asleep trying to read in high school. We do this for our listeners, the owner, the entrepreneur, the manager, or the civic leader who doesn't have the time to read, dissect, analyze, and leverage insights from literature to execute leadership best practices in the confusing and chaotic postmodern world we all now inhabit. Welcome to the rescuing of Western civilization at the intersection of literature and leadership. Welcome to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast.
Hello, my name is Hassan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, episode number 112. In this episode today, we are going to start covering what is truly a massive book. Now, it is a serialized story, or a collection of a serialized story, featuring intrigue, adventure, romance, pathos, and everything else. The entire spectrum of human emotion is in this book. And it is all set against the background of the French Revolution and the aftermath of the actions across the flat pan of Europe from the buzzsaw known as Napoleon Bonaparte. This book is so massive, I'm going to be honest, I didn't get through it. But that's okay, because our guest today did. As a matter of fact, just like War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy, which we barely covered part one of in episode number 104, which you should go listen to that. By the way, that's the most downloaded episode so far this season. This book is so deep and involved that I think we're only going to get through barely the first part of it today. Matter of fact, that's all I planned for. And that's okay, because we'll have our guest back to talk about this book in the future, because I am going to finish it. It's sort of one of my missions for this year. Today, we will be summarizing and analyzing the themes that are embedded for leaders in the first part of the 1,243-page bone book of a novel. And by the way, that doesn't include annotations and notes and bibliography at the end. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre, depending upon your perspective and your level of French, Dumas. Leaders, revenge may be a dish best served cold, but make sure that if you go down that road, it works on the victim you've selected successfully. And today we are joined in our journey down this leadership path with the Count of Monte Cristo by our returning guest co-host, Christen Horne. How are you doing, Christen?
Hello, I am doing well.
Yes, Christen has had a bunch of life changes. It's been a year since she was on the podcast. What episode were you on? Do you remember with us initially?
I don't remember the number. We were doing Ender's Game.
Yes, we did Ender's Game. That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. Worse than Scott Card. I should go back and listen to that episode. I don't remember the number either. It's okay.
Yeah.
But we are going to get started in the Count of Monte Cristo. By the way, it is an open source book, which is great. You can actually go and get it online if you want. So we will be reading directly from my version of the open source book known as The Count of Monte Cristo. And we are going to start with chapter 1. I love saying this word, Marseille, arrival. On February 24th, 1815, the lookout at Notre Dame de la Garde signaled the arrival of the three-master Pharaon, coming from Smyrna, Trieste, and Naples. As usual, a coastal pilot immediately left the port, sailed hard by the Chateau d'If, and boarded the ship between the Cap de Morgue and the island of Rieux. And once, as was also customary, the terrace of Port Saint-Jean was thronged with onlookers, because the arrival of a ship is always a great event in Marseille, particularly when the vessel, like the Pharaon, has been built, fitted out, and laded in the shipyards of the old port and belongs to an owner from the town. Meanwhile, the ship was drawing near and had successfully negotiated the narrows created by some volcanic upheaval between the islands of Calcerin and Carré, and it rounded Pomigue, and was proceeded under its three topsails, its outer jib, and its spanker, but slowly and with such melancholy progress that bystanders instinctively sensing some misfortune, wondered what the accident could have occurred on board. Nevertheless, those who were experts in nautical manners acknowledged that if there had been such an accident, it could not have affected the vessel itself, for its progress gave every indication of a ship under perfect control. The anchor was ready to drop, and the bowsprit shrouds loosed. Next to the pilot, who was preparing to guide the Pharaon through the narrow entrance to the port of Marseille, stood a young man, alert and sharp-eyed, supervising every movement of the ship and repeating each of the pilot's commands. One of the spectators on the terrace of Fort Saint-Jean had been particularly affected by the vague sense of unease that hovered among them, so much so that he could not wait for the vessel to come to land. He leapt into a small boat and ordered it to be rowed out to the Pharaon, coming alongside opposite the cove of La Réserve. When he saw the man approaching, the young sailor left his place beside the pilot and, hand in hand, came and leant on the bulwarks of the ship. He was a young man of between 18 and 20, tall, slim, with fine dark eyes and ebony black hair. His whole demeanor possessed the calm and resolve peculiar to men who have been accustomed from childhood to wrestle with danger. "Ah, it is you, Dantes," the man in the boat cried. "What has happened, and why is there this air of dejection about all on board?" "A great misfortune, Monsieur Morel," the young man replied. "A great misfortune, especially for me. While off of Civitavecchia, we lost our good Captain Leclerc." "And the cargo?" the ship owner answered brusquely. "It has come safe to port, Monsieur Morel, but I think you will be content on that score. But poor Captain Leclerc." "What happened to him, then?" the ship owner asked, visibly relieved. "So what happened to the good captain?" He is dead." "Lost overboard?" "No, monsieur. He died of an apoplectic fever in terrible agony." Then turning back to his crew, he said, "Look lively there, every man to his station, and drop anchor." The crew obeyed. As one man, the 8 or 10 of the sailors of which it was composed leapt, some to the sheets and others to the braces, others to the halyards, others to the jib, and still others to the brails. The young sailor glanced casually at the start of his operation, and seeing that his orders were being carried out, prepared to resume the conversation. "But how did this misfortune occur?" the ship owner continued, picking up where the young man had left off. "By heaven, monsieur, in the most unexpected way imaginable. After a long conversation with the commander of the port, Captain Leclerc left Naples in a state of great agitation. 24 hours later, he was seized with fever, and 3 days after that, he was dead. We gave him the customary funeral, and now he rests, decently wrapped in a hammock, with a 36-pound cannonball at his feet and another at his head, off the island of Giglo. We brought his medal and his sword back for his widow. Much good it did him," the young man continued with a melancholy smile. "To fight the war against the English for 10 years, only to die at last, like anyone else, in his bed." A writer, Count of Monte Cristo, a fellow named Alexandre Dumas, born July 24th, 1802, died December 5th, 1870, was a French novelist and playwright. His works have been translated into many languages, and he is one of the most widely read French authors, probably in French history. Outside of, those authors of political treatises or philosophical ones like the Derridas or the de Tocquevilles or the Rousseaus of the world. Since the early 20th century, his novels have been adapted into nearly 200 different variations of film. As a matter of fact, you've probably seen the film The Count of Monte Cristo long before reading the book The Count of Monte Cristo or even hearing of it. Oh, it doesn't really matter. So many variations. I mean, this book is one of those books that has buried itself into the DNA of the West, not just America, the West. You can go to like Germany and they know what the Count of Monte Cristo is. You can go to probably Japan and they know what the Count of Monte Cristo is. Dumas was prolific in several genres, and he began his career by writing plays, which were successfully produced from the first. He wrote numerous magazine articles and travel books and published works totaling 100,000 pages. As a matter of fact, this guy was also an entrepreneur and a marketer, and he hired other people to ghostwrite. Yeah, I see you, James Patterson. Ghostwrite some of his books, allegedly. His father, General Thomas Alexandre Dumas David de la Pelletière, was born in the French colony of Santo Domingo, the present-day Haiti, to Alexandre Antoine David de la Pelletière, a French nobleman, and Marie Cécile Dumas, an African slave. And so what this means is that Alexandre Dumas was actually we don't like using this word, but I'm going to go ahead and use it anyway. He was, technically speaking, a mulatto. That means he was of mixed race origin. Everybody gets upset when you say the word mulatto. They get really upset when you say the word quadroon. Anyway, Alexander acquired work with Louis-Philippe, Duke of Orleans. Then, as a writer, he became a writer over the course of time. And he created a career that led to much early success. Now, remember I said he was a marketer? That was part of the reason why he serialized his novels over the long period of time. And he wrote many, and created a modernized version of many modern myths that we just take for granted now, such as the Three Musketeers, the D'Artagnan romances, which has also been turned into several films. And of course, even a film that played in my house a couple of weeks ago with Kevin Costner, that was the version I saw, Robin Hood. English playwright Watts Phillips, who knew Dumas later in his life, described him as, quote, the most generous, large-hearted being in the world. He was also the most delightfully amusing and egotistical creature on the face of the earth. His tongue was like a windmill. Once set in motion, you would never know when he would stop, especially if the theme was himself. I love that, by the way. Back in the day, people really knew how to get after each other, particularly writers. I mean, writerly disputes, which is one of the things that we're all missing with the Twitterization of our world. Although I think Dumas would have loved Twitter. And
Probably.
He's all about, oh my God, like YouTube, Twitter. He would have been all about that life. He'd been like, oh, I can go to scale with all of this and I can meet everyone. Oh, please, where do I sign up? Get me there now.
Be dominating.
Oh my God, he'd be running everybody out of the room. So Christen, let's start off with, because you were the one that recommended we read The Count of Monte Cristo. You were the one that recommended this book. And so I'm reading this book, not under duress, but under your recommendation. And so
is that how you read the rest of your books?
No. I did War and Peace to myself. It's fine. It's whatever. I'm immolating myself on the horns of Tolstoy. No. And it's interesting. So over the course of the last month, we've been covering a lot of books like Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. We covered that this month.
It's a great one.
Yes, it is. We also talked a little bit about and covered the book Night by Elie Wiesel, Holocaust literature. Later on this month, towards the end of this month, we'll be looking at Eichmann in Jerusalem by Hannah Arendt, Meditation on the Banality of Evil. And one of the things that unites all of those books, whether it's Hannah Arendt or Harper Lee, or even either one of those two authors, we'll use those two as sort of points, along with The Count of Monte Cristo and Alexandre Dumas' work. One of the things that unites those works together is the idea of how a person, particularly a male, develops a moral compass. You see Atticus Finch's moral compass in To Kill a Mockingbird. Elie Wiesel developed a moral compass in The Horrors of the Holocaust. At the age of 16, he was dumped into a concentration camp. When you look at Hannah Arendt's work and her analysis of Eichmann's trial in Jerusalem, the last of the Nuremberg trials back in the 1960s, you realize that Eichmann struggled to have a moral in the first place, which is kind of one of the more amazing things that you ever see in a human being. And then in The Count of Monte Cristo, the driver for this is revenge, of course, which comes from a place of a lack of moral compass. It comes from envy and jealousy and all of this. Now, in the first part of the book is the setup, right? Oh, and by the way, Dumas gives a lot of different motives for people. We're going to get into the motives of like Danglars and other folks here today. We're gonna kind of pull a little bit of that apart, but I want you to talk about The Count of Monte Cristo, why you recommended this book, why readers should spend time slogging through this phone book of a book, or even just listening to this episode about it, which is just the first part. By the way, we're going to cover like maybe the first like 5 chapters, maybe.
I
of
mean,
like a 50 chapter book.
I have a confession though. See, this is the copy that I read in high school, and I
Yes.
loved it so much that I just went and bought the same copy, and it's been in my library for years. But it is abridged.
Um,
And I
some of us
will
put in the work over here.
I
Some of us put in the work. It's okay. It's
so
fine.
you're reading like the first 5 pages and I'm following along. I'm like, yeah, that was a page and a half for me. Um, so
Got the edited version.
yeah.
Yanking out all those extra words, which
I
I don't know. Dumas
remember
probably would not have liked that part, by the way. He would not have liked the decline of literate, like, ability or attention span. He would not have been a fan of that.
Well, I remember because the first time I read it was back in my like advanced English class in high school, and I remember my English teacher kind of summarizing what was left out by in the abridgment, and I
Mhm.
remember thinking, okay, that's probably not important. So I don't know. When I come back for us to finish this, I'll have to go find the unabridged and see if I can.
I will hold up. So I'm going to hold up my
It.
unabridged copy. It's a Penguin Classics unabridged copy. Normally, I don't
Oh my
talk about them.
gosh.
It's
No,
oh yes.
I
When I
have a
looked at it,
3-month-old.
I'm not demanding. I never demand that guests do a thing that I would not do myself.
uh
To paraphrase from Jay-Z.
so why did I mean I remember loving this book. For me, it really one of the reasons that I like fiction in general, my stories, like the books that I like is it has a lot to do with my moral compass and how
Mhm.
like my worldview and stuff. And in this book, the bad guys all get their just desserts, right? Yes, it's
Mhm.
vengeance, and there's a lot more conversation about like vengeance and satisfaction and whether worth pursuing and all that. But the people that this guy takes out are genuinely bad people.
Mhm.
And so it just feels really good to watch him take them down, not um but in very unobvious ways. He basically lets them um kill themselves.
Mhm.
Like he just leads them all to ruin, but through their own natures.
Right.
And that's fascinating to watch. And so just it's very cleverly done. It's very subtle, and well, in that regard,
Mhm.
in how he leads them to their destruction. In
Mhm.
other regards, you read this book and you're like, well, that's a literary cliche now, and that is too. And it definitely got me thinking through this most recent read through. It's like, I wonder, obviously it was ridiculously popular.
Oh yeah. I mean, it
So
was serialized. Like
but
it was
like
insane.
but I trained 10 years as an opera singer, and like the version of Carmen that we
Mhm.
have right now, the composer considered it pop, like drivel. He was so upset by the artistic merit that ended up being successful, as in there was none. He's like,
Mhm.
here, this is what the people want, but this is trash. This is not what I wanted to write. And then Tchaikovsky said the same thing about his most popular ballet, The Nutcracker.
Mhm.
He just called it he called the bonbon, right? Just sweet, sickly sweet. And so that got me thinking about this book. It was ridiculously popular. But like I said, I have a 3-month-old, so I didn't have a time to go in and look like, hey, was this like considered sophisticated,
Mhm.
and like were the great minds of the time reading this and thinking about it, or was it just a book for the masses,
Mhm.
and that's why we still read it today? And right, it's almost I read it in an English class, so I almost feel like it might be, and we're discussing it on this podcast, so it's like
Right.
is asking the question almost sacrilege, like, does this book have literary merit?
Well, okay. No. Well, we're a literature podcast and we're a leadership podcast. We kind of merge those two things together. So yes, I think it has literary merit and leadership merit.
Oh, I do too. It was just funny
Yeah,
that the
yeah.
question
But it's
popped into
funny
my
that
head. It was like,
yeah.
whoa.
Well, so my kid, my youngest daughter, who's 14, she's reading F. Scott Fitzgerald's Tender is the Night.
Mm.
And we were talking about this and it doesn't matter the context, but we were having a conversation about this book. And I said to her, F. Scott Fitzgerald would really be irritable that The Great Gatsby is being read by high school students if he were still alive. Like he would be irritated by this. This would drive him over a
Hated that
cliff.
book.
He would, but he would consider it to be an artistic failure. So you talk about, Carmen, or you talk about Tchaikovsky, right? There's, and you're, I mean, I want you to talk a little bit about your background, remind folks of your background and your writing and all that. You're creating work. I create work.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this gap between, and you even mentioned it, what the people want versus what might be artistic and might be like mature.
It's the great struggle. What's
marketable?
How do you
right? Yeah. How do you as a creator cross that gap? And we'll talk about Dumas in a minute, because I think he crossed that gap by serialization. I think that's how he crossed that gap.
Yeah.
And you can look at the internet as a massive serialization machine, but so many people have turned it into a massive clickbait machine, which I think would drive. I think that part, of course, would drive Dumas crazy as well. I think would also drive Tchaikovsky crazy as well. He would have massive problem with Taylor Swift. He just would. He'd be like, I don't like her. And
I have a massive problem with Taylor Swift, especially when she is being compared to Shakespeare.
Yeah, that's a bridge too far.
I saw that headline and I was appalled. I was like, look, I'm not reading what you're reading, Hasan. That stuff, I'm like, that scares me. I'm just going to stay in my little fantasy world. But when I saw that, I rolled over in my own grave. Like that, no, there cannot be German professors that actually think that's true.
But this is the so there's a well, okay, so I want to, that's another idea right there. I want to explore too.
Sorry.
No. So the gap between what people want versus art, how do you cross that gap? Talk a little bit about your background. What do you do?
I mean, I think the opera world right now doesn't know how to answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
Because opera, I think, is dying, and it's partially in part because of marketing, in part because actually we'll talk a little bit about this later, is the people that are in charge are very stubborn and stuck in their ways, and they don't want to innovate. Right. So there's a little bit of two things going on, which is a real shame, because the art form is magnificent. It's basically the Olympics of what the human voice is capable of. And then the stories, even though like the style of singing estranges people a little bit, but the stories are so relatable still. And so it's just, but the industry, they don't know how to answer that question. Except there is one little house, that's, opera house. There's one company in LA that is doing actually really well at making the stories, the operas, like accessible. And so but while keeping most of the, and I say most of the integrity, because we've definitely had people go to those operas, be like, that's not what they'll look at the super titles, right? The translations, be like, that's not the right translation. If I saw that in a beginner opera singer's notebook, I'd slap her hand.
Okay, so opera. Okay, so let's. One of my good friends, he does opera, and I did a jazz festival locally in my town, and I'm a huge fan of the jazz genre and all of that kind of stuff. And so the guy who we handed the committee that we handed off to, the person who heads it is a professionally trained opera singer. And so it's interesting to watch him kind of navigate this, because jazz is not opera and opera is not jazz. Like those are two different things, right?
There's one that Gershwin wrote. I mean, there's Porgy and Bess.
There's Porgy and Bess, yeah. But past that, like, really, what do you mean?
Yeah, we got nothing.
The two don't make sweet, beautiful music
together.
Not
really, yeah. Maybe they could.
Maybe they could. Maybe they should.
Maybe that's fighting.
Right. Exactly. Maybe we should have a rapprochement.
Why can't we be friends?
Some détente, right? Like between the Russians and the Americans in the Cold War. Like, why can't we just have détente? Why can't we just have that? There's two movies that I think of when I think of opera, and I think of this idea of integrity in art. I think of Whiplash, and then I think of Tar, which recently came out.
We talked about that last time. It's been on my list. I still haven't watched it.
You still haven't watched it. It's okay. You got a 3-month-old. It's fine. You got a lot of things going on. And I don't want to go back to that. Instead, what I want to say is, I think both of those films represent the attempt by, you pointed out that there are folks who are stubborn who don't want to change. I don't think it's that they're stubborn and don't want to change. I think they're so committed to quality that they don't see a way to bring that commitment into the new thing. And I think that's really hard for people of all genres, because what they don't realize is the new thing is going to make new demands in different ways of quality. Whereas that if you hold on to the old ways of maintaining gatekeeping, if we're going to use that term, gatekeeping quality, you're right. You're not free to go to those other places where you can still gatekeep in different ways. Like the and I say a lot about these women, but say what you want about the Kardashians, and I say a lot of negative things about them. I do. But one of the things they do really well is they gatekeep that brand. They do. They gatekeep the hell out of that sucker. Like, you have people who come into that brand. I'll use Bruce Jenner as an example, who do not come out the other side of it the same as when they entered the gate. And I'll just leave it at that. Lamar Odom was a basketball player who got mixed up with those young ladies. He went into the gate one way, he came out the gate another way. And of course, the biggest example, other than Mr. Bruce Jenner, the former Mr. Bruce Jenner, is the current Kanye West, who went in the gate one way and came out the gate totally different. Those women are a buzzsaw, and they are maintaining quality, good, bad, ugly, or indifferent, inside of that thing. And they're doing it in that new media space in a different kind of way than they would have had to have done in the 1950s.
Oh, yeah.
Then Marilyn Monroe did it. Or Jean Harlow, or any of or Betty Page, right? Any of the sex symbol women that could have been interchanged with the Kardashians in their own era. I think the same thing happens with high art, opera, fine art. I think jazz is high art, but okay, let's just use opera, any kind of the fine arts. And I think it's that lack of being able to step over and see a new way to do a different gate. I think that's the thing that people are missing.
That's interesting. It's a very interesting that's a interesting frame. I like it.
Well, you
because
right.
opera didn't used to be the high art. It used to be the art of the people, the pop.
Right. But that was back when people had to leave their houses and dress up and go do stuff. And now people don't have to leave their houses, or to leave your house, it must be something worthwhile. Yeah. I'm a big fan of minor league baseball. My daughter and I try to go to at least a couple of minor league baseball games every summer. Baseball is one of those sports that it's shocking in the era that we live in that baseball still survives in any form. It's shocking.
I love baseball. I go every chance I get.
That goes along with the opera, though. It's the same idea. It's that we get dressed up. We're going to go do this thing. Yeah. We're going to have a good time. And you look at pictures of people who attended baseball games back in the 30s and 20s, 30s, and 40s when baseball was huge. Like my grandma, black, white, didn't matter. You dressed up in your suit. You put your tie, your fedora on. She dressed up in a nice dress. She was carrying a parasol. And you're going to go to there. You're going to watch a doubleheader that's going to start at 10 o'clock. Doubleheader is going to go. Going to be about 10 to 3. There's going to be a little bit of an intermission. And then you're going to go from 4 to 8. And that's a whole day. Yeah. And you're going to have popcorn. You're going to have hot dogs, peanuts. You might have some beer.
Cracker Jacks.
It's going to be fun. The baseball players are in a space where, just like in opera, or even in an orchestra, where individually they all have to be good, but if one person has an individually bad day, the rest of everybody doesn't have to go along. And so baseball is a game of individuals played as a team. Whereas, and I've talked about this a little bit on the podcast before, although not extensively, I like to explore this thesis a little bit more, maybe not in this episode, but later on, where we had a switch in the 60s that happened. We switched from a baseball culture to a football culture, and no one talks about it. And football is game. You can tell by your tongue sticking out. Football is a game, is a team game. Think about every job interview you've ever been on. Are you a team player? Team building. Football is a game where if the quarterback isn't leading the team effectively, then the team falls apart. I'm a Broncos fan. Russell Wilson, less said about that, the better. And so like that team aspect really began to filter into our culture in the 1960s, and the baseball aspect began to like go away and go away and go away. And now the only reason baseball kind of hangs on is because of nostalgia primarily, but also it owns summer because there's nothing else. Although football's creeping in and creeping in and creeping in, and then you got hockey and baseball or basketball creeping down, and everybody's the other three major sports are trying to push baseball out because baseball players don't care about Instagram. They're not, they're not. I mean, they don't care. They're there to hit the ball. It's a simple game. You hit the ball, you catch the ball, and you throw the ball. Simple game. And you run. You run a lot. And you better run really fast. And so, like, it's not a game for social media. It's not a game for clicks. It's not a game, but it is a game that can be gate kept inside of summer. If baseball ever loses summer, baseball's done. It's done. It'll die.
Oh, sad. It would be sad.
You write books. Tell us about the new book you're writing. Or you've got
I am writing, the trilogy. We have a name for the trilogy.
Okay. So what's the name for the trilogy?
It's called The Bell and the Bow.
Bell and the Bow. Okay.
Yeah, which is fun because it, references the two protagonists. But depending on how you spell the words, they can flip, right? So the bell is the male, the bow is the female. But then if bell can also be Belle for female, and bow. Anyway, I like it. I have fun. It's a fantasy trilogy. It started as a love story. There's a lot of adventure and monster killing in it. We think a lot, and I say we because I'm writing it with a co-author, one of my best friends. And we think a lot about tropes and cliches, which, now going back and reading Count of Monte Cristo, you see, you're like, well, that's a cliche now. But at the time was probably just like, everybody's like, what? When you read it and the narrator, like, spoilers, one of the characters dies. So, when the first, person that the Count wants vengeance on dies, the narrator does not reveal that the Count is Edmond Dantes. And I was like, did people not know? Like, was this something like there was this, like, their sixth sense, like this biggest twist that nobody saw coming? Because, like, we read it now and I'm like, well, that's the same guy.
Right. Okay.
Like,
so
that's clearly the same guy. But Dumas is like seeding it methodically, and he gives the reader little hints. And I think I saw that, I was like, oh, this is how it reminded me of our process, where like there will be this big twist that happens in like book 3, and we go back and we seed it in book 1, we ramp it up a little bit in book 2, and then boom, it hits you in book 3. And the smart readers, are you allowed to say that? I don't know.
Oh yeah, you can
a lot of times I think about myself, be like, well, if I was reading this book, I'd be like, oh,
right,
that happened in book 1 and book 2. Oh, they've been building to this the whole time. And then I also think about rereadability, because I love rereading my favorite books. And so, readers that, hopefully fall in love with our books will go back and they'll read book 1 and be like, they were planning this the whole time. I do my best to put a lot of my favorite things that, like, it, and by my favorite things, I mean like quality. Like the things that I see in books that I'm like, that worked, that got me so good. We do our best to make sure that it's meticulously woven that way. And that's also why the writing today really irritates me, because they're like, how much are those writers getting paid? Well, hold on, that's actually a different question because of the writer's strike. But still, like, Disney, you can afford more. Pay writers to do better.
We're gonna save that to the next section. We're gonna save that. I took a note. We're gonna save that. I said, no, it's good. No, because I wanted
so mad. Be like, how much did they spend writing this bullshit?
$22 million. $22 million on an episode. One episode.
Meanwhile, quality writers are,
but this is the thing,
putting their novels out on what Amazon can't get published, And if they
Well-
do get a publishing contract, their advances are terrible now.
Minuscule.
It's just like,
Oh, I'm going to
but
take a note
that's
on
where
that
the
too.
writers are. That's
All right,
want to support writers, go buy books. Sorry. I'm sorry.
I want to talk about that because I know you saw the little reveal from the Department of Justice documents about Penguin Random House, where they opposed the Penguin Random House merger, and there was the document dump. Oh gosh, this was probably about 2 months ago, and it went through the book world like wildfire, where it revealed just how many books don't get published and how few books actually make the New York Times bestseller list and what the New York Times bestseller list numbers are. And I'm going to put this here before we go into our next section here, which we will in a moment. But most books sell fewer than 100 copies. And by the way, this doesn't matter if it's a celebrity author, like Billie Eilish apparently released a book that sold less than 500 copies. The singer.
I mean, who's following Billie Eilish and thinks, I want her book?
But here's the thing. We already talked about Taylor Swift. Let me bring her back up for just a moment.
Oh no, please don't.
Taylor Swift wouldn't be able to sell more than 10,000 books.
But
But 10,000 books gets you
gratifying.
but it gets you onto the New York Times bestseller list. And by the way, most of these book publishing companies, we will go back to this in a moment, survive off of the back catalog. Do you know the number one book that's published by most major booksellers, number one book in America that sells the most number of books that most booksellers survive on? Number one back catalog book in history.
I don't.
The Bible.
That was going to be my guess, but it felt so like a cliche to say it. We're like, is that the Bible?
Back catalog authors and back catalog books that came about before the internet. So that's why Stephen King, when he went and testified against the merger, basically said in his testimony that this merger, if it is allowed to go through, will actually impact not him. He'll be fine. He'll always get a book published, but it will impact people negatively who are seeking to break into the market.
What a guy.
But people who are seeking to break into the market currently can't get in anyway.
Mm-mm.
And that's why self-publishing is there. And we'll get into all of that in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
A couple other thoughts that I have before we go. So this book was published in 1844 and was serialized through to 1845, which means in 2024, we are coming up on the 180th. Actually, this year is the 180th anniversary of The Count of Monte Cristo being serialized. That is, and when you get 200 films made off of one book, that tells you how deep the tropes and the cliches have just, they're part of the background.
200? They've made 200 films?
Over 200 films. Yeah.
So I knew
Which is insane.
about two.
Sorry, since the early 20th century, let me go back. Since the early 20th century, his novels, all of Dumas's novels, not just Count of Monte Cristo, all of Dumas's novels have been adapted into nearly 200 films.
Okay.
Which means the vast majority, I'm sure the vast majority of the Count of Monte
Three Musketeers has been made at least 4 or 5.
At least 4 or 5 times.
10
Count of Monte
times.
Cristo, 12, 13, 14. I mean, and by the way, that's play versions of Count of Monte Cristo, or I would throw in there too. And then the other thing that I would point out is this, and we're going to talk about revenge here in a second. There's a great line that is said in The Way of the Gun, a movie that came out way back at the end of the 1990s with Ryan Philippe and Benicio del Toro as two bagmen. And they were talking to an old bagman, played by James Sonny from The Godfather. I can't think of the actor's name right now. And he says to them, and I quote, and I love this quote, "Justice is just revenge without the satisfaction." I love that line.
Interesting.
Of course, the other great line inside of The Way of the Gun is, "Never trust a bagman, and there's always free cheese in a mousetrap," which is true. So watch out for AI, by the way. That's a mousetrap. Right,
Yeah.
But there's always free cheese in there, though. Like, go ahead and get in. Go ahead. Go right in. All right, back to the book.
Oh, goodness.
The Count of Monte Cristo. Let's talk a little bit about revenge. I'm going to go into the chapter here known as the plot. And this is where after Danglars comes on to land, and
Danglars.
Danglars, sorry, I'm
Sorry.
with the appropriate French Elon. I'm not giving enough French Elon. I'm trying to save that up for when we
It's
actually
fine.
read passages from the book. But we're going to go on this chapter of the plot. We'll read a few pages from this, and then we're going to talk about revenge. And writers today in AI. So AI, revenge. This is going to be good. Christen's going to love this, and so are you all. We're listening to this. Danglars' eyes followed Edmond and Mercedes until the two lovers had vanished around one corner of the Fort Saint Nicolas. Then, turning at last, he noticed Fernand, who had slipped back to his chair, pale and trembling, while Cardarou was mumbling the words of a drinking song. So Danglars was on the ship. Just to give you a little background. Danglars was on the ship with Edmond Dantes, Edmond, and Mercedes. Mercedes is his betrothed. Okay, this is going to come back later. It's going to be an interesting plot point. But Danglars is, well, he's not the captain, and he wants to be the captain. And then you've got
bookkeeper, I believe.
Yeah, he's the ship's. He basically makes sure that, and it was interesting because I read another book about shipping and shipbuilding. And there were positions on ships back in the day, which nobody knows this now, which is basically accountants for like a floating vessel. And they made sure that the amount of goods that left the ship and the amount of goods that came back onto the ship balanced at the end, right? They also did deals when they would go into foreign ports. They had multiple languages. It was a very complicated role that they had. In addition to having to work on the ship just like everybody else. All hands on deck means all hands. And so that was Danglars. And then you've got Fernand. Fernand was the person who, when Edmond was, shall we say, out to sea, was sniffing around Mercedes, trying to get her to fall in love with him. And finally, Cardarou was the character of Cardarou is framed by Alexandre Dumas as a neighbor, not framed. He is a neighbor who loans money to Edmond's father, and then demands repayment of that money, gets the money repaid, and then Edmond comes back with more money and just gives it to Cardarou, thus creating a dynamic of debt, which Cardarou struggles with, but not as much as some, which we'll see here in just a moment. So that's the background on chapter 4 of the plot. So, my good sir, Danglars told Fernand, not everyone, I think, is happy about this marriage. I am in despair, said Fernand. You're in love with Mercedes? I adore her. For a long time, ever since I've known her, I've always loved her. And all you could do is sit there and tear your hair out instead of finding some way out of the dilemma. My God, I didn't know that this was how the people of your country behaved. What do you expect me to do? Fernand asked. How do I know? Is it any of my business? As I see it, I'm not the one who's in love with Mademoiselle Mercedes. You are. Seek and ye shall find, the gospel says. I have found already. What? I wanted to put my knife into the creature, but the girl said that her fiancé was harmed. She would kill herself. Ah, people say such things, but they don't do them. You don't know Mercedes, monsieur. If she threatens to do something, she will. Idiot. Danglars muttered. What does it matter whether she kills herself or not, provided Dantes does not become captain? And before Mercedes dies, Fernand went on in firmly resolute tones, I should die myself. There's love for you, Cardarou said in a voice increasingly slurred by drink. There's love, or I don't know it. Come now, said Danglars. You seem an agreeable enough lad to me, and by Jove, I'd like to ease your sorrow, but yes, said Cardarou. Come now. My good friend, Danglars remarked, you are 3/4 drunk. Go the whole way and finish the bottle. Drink, but don't interfere with our business, because you need a clear head for what we're doing. Me? Drunk? Said Cardarou. Never. I could take another 4 of your bottles, which are no bigger than bottles of Vin de Cologne. Père Pampli, bring us some more wine. And to make the point, Cardarou banged his glass on the table. You were saying, monsieur? Fernand asked, impatient to hear what else Danglars had to tell him. What was I saying? I don't remember. This drunkard Cardarou I put it out of my mind. Drunkard if you like. A curse on those who fear wine. It's because they have evil thoughts and they are afraid that wine will loosen their tongues. Cataroo began to sing the last two lines of a song, which was much in vogue at the time. The flood proved it beyond a doubt. All wicked men do water drink. You were saying, Monsieur, Fernand continued, that you'd like to ease my sorrow, but you added, ah, yes, but I added that to give you satisfaction. It is enough for Dantes not to marry the one you love. And this marriage, it seems to me, could very well not take place even if Dantes does not die. Only death will separate them, said Fernand. You have the brains of an oyster, my friend, said Cataroo. And Danglars here, who is a sharp one, crafty as a Greek, will prove you wrong. You are Danglars, I've stuck up for you. Tell him that Dantes doesn't have to die. In any case, it would be a pity if he died. He's a good lad, Dantes. I like him. Good health, Dantes. Fernand rose impatiently to his feet. Let him babble, Danglars said, putting a hand on the young man's arm. And for that matter, drunk as he is not so far wrong. Absence separates as effectively as death. Just suppose that there were walls of a prison between Edmond and Mercedes. That would separate them no more or no less than a tombstone. Yes, but people get out of prison, said Cataroo, who was gripping onto the conversation with what remained of his wits. And when you get out of prison and you are called Edmond Dantes, you take revenge. What does that matter? Said Fernand. In any event, Cataroo continued, why should they put Dantes in prison? He hasn't stolen anything, killed anyone, committed any murder. Shut up, said Danglars. I won't want to shut up, said Cataroo. I want to know why they should put Dantes in prison. I like Dantes. For health. He poured back another glass of wine. Danglars assessed the extent of the tailor's drunkenness from his dull eyes and turned towards Fernand. So you understand that there is no need to kill him, he said. No, surely not. As if you said a moment ago there was some means of having Dantes arrested. But do you have such means? If we look, Danglars answered, we can find one. But damn it, why should this concern me? What business is it of mine? I don't know why it should concern you, Fernand said, grasping his arm. What I do know is that you have some private animosity against Dantes. A man who feels hated cannot be mistaken about that feeling in others. I have some reason to hate Dantes? None, I swear. I saw that you were unhappy and took an interest in your unhappiness. That's all. But if you're going to imagine that I am acting on my own behalf, then farewell, my good friend. You can manage for yourself. Here Danglars himself made as if to get up. No, stay, said Fernand. When it comes down to it, it's of no matter to me whether you have some bone to pick with Dantes or not. I do, and I freely admit it. Find the means, and I shall carry it out, as long as there is no murder involved, for Mercedes said that she would kill herself if anyone killed Dantes. Cataroo, who let his head fall on the table, lifted it and turned his dull, drink-sodden eyes on Fernand and Danglars. Kill Dantes, he said. Who's talking about killing Dantes? I don't want him killed. He's my friend. This morning he offered to share his money with me, and I shared mine with him. I don't want anyone to kill Dantes. Who said anything about killing an idiot? Danglars went on. It's nothing more than a joke. Drink to his health and leave us be, he added, filling Cataroo's glass. Now they're going to go on and on like this for a little while. And then Danglars.
That's why the abridged version exists.
That's right. Danglars is going to write a note, and I'm going to read the note because the note is important. This is an important thing for leaders to pay attention to here. It basically puts the revenge part of this plot in motion. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. To illustrate his meaning, Danglars wrote the following lines with his left hand, the writing sloping backwards so that it bore no resemblance to his usual handwriting, then passed it to Fernand, who read it in a hushed voice. Quote, the Crown Prosecutor is advised by a friend of the monarchy and the faith that one Edmond Dantes, first mate of the Pharaon, arriving this morning from Smyrna after putting in at Naples and Porto Ferrajo, was entrusted by Murat with a letter for the usurper, and by the usurper with a letter from the Bonapartist Committee in Paris, or to the Bonapartist Committee in Paris. Proof of his guilt will be found when he is arrested, since the letter will be discovered either on his person or at the house of his father, or in his cabin on board the Pharaon. Close quote. So there we have it, Danglars continued. In this way, your revenge will be consistent with common sense, because it could in no way be traced back to you, and the matter would proceed of his own accord. You would merely have to fold the letter, as I am doing now, and write on it to the Crown Prosecutor. That would settle it. And Danglars, with the address, a simple stroke of the pen. I like that chapter. It's good setup. got the dynamic between the three guys. I imagine them sitting at a table outside in Paris in like 1844. It's a wooden table. It's kind of rotted. You got Cataroo, who is drunk off his behind. It's like the Three Stooges. And men are big fans of the Three Stooges. It's like the Three Stooges. You got Danglars, who absolutely knows what's happening. He's a total firm. He's committed to this idea that he's going to get Dantes. And he's already figured out what he wants to do in order to do it, but he doesn't want to have his hand on the knife. Then you've got Fernand, who is driven by passion and revenge, but mostly is driven by this idea of lust for Mercedes. He doesn't really love her other than as an object inside of his own head. And then you've got Cataroo, who, well, in vino veritas, right, to paraphrase from Tombstone, there's truth in drink. Cataroo is the only one who might, even though he's drunk, who might be acting and behaving in a way that is consistent with what is actual reality, which is, why would anybody have a problem with this guy? Why don't we just leave him alone? He's not done anything to us. And this gets us in the 21st century because we don't know why we do what we do. We are very sophisticated psychologically and sociologically, or at least we like to convince ourselves that we are because of all the research that we've done about human behavior going all the way back to the 1940s. We like to convince ourselves that we're really sophisticated, but our motivations, why we actually do what we do, the stuff all the way down deep, stuff we don't talk
very
about.
base.
Oh, the stuff we don't talk about at cocktail parties with polite people, all that stuff is still down there. But we don't like using those words. We don't like using words like envy or jealousy or vanity or pride or lust. We don't like using it. Greed we're okay with using because back in the 80s, we decided that greed was something that we could tie to capitalism. So we'll talk about that out loud all the time. But all those other these motivations, all of those other ones, like, and I know this happens to me all the time. When I talk about envy out loud, when I talk about social media as an envy machine, which is really what it is, all of a sudden, everybody makes that sound right there that you just made, Christen. And then most people have nothing else to say after that because they then pull out their phones and they get on Instagram because you can't be off of Instagram for more than 5 minutes, right? Can't be off that envy machine for more than 5 minutes, right? It's okay. It's fine. I'm there too. I'm no better.
Oh, I actually, that when I started writing my book, it was 2020, right after the lockdowns.
Yep.
And I had also at the same time decided to get off of social media.
Yep.
And discovered I had a book to write. So I did this instead. It feels a lot better.
Well, and it's not just social media. Like, that's easy to blame. Like, think about the services that we use that are driven by imagery. So I'll use a perfect innocuous example. If you want to buy a house, no one is just driving around neighborhoods looking for sale signs anymore. I know this. One of the things that I do is I work in buying and selling of real estate, right? In my local area. Everyone goes to an app on their phone called, that begins with a Z and ends with an ILO, right? Everybody goes there. And there are pictures on that app that are designed with specific filters. This is what the AI does, that are designed to get you to click on the picture and designed to get you to want it. And by the way, wanting means you don't have. And when you don't have, it means you desire. And when you desire, that comes from a place of, I know we're going to use an old school word here, makes everybody feel icky, envy, right? I would rather have that thing, right? And this is how the psychology
Grass
works.
is always greener.
Absolutely, particularly if it's enhanced through AI. And so
the grass doesn't even exist.
The grass ain't even there, girlfriend.
Especially in Southern California.
That's and the house is only 1.9 million. Of course you can afford that with all those pictures. Of course you can. And so and it's only 1,800 square feet. Oh, that was a little too close to the bone. That one got a little,
we were in the market 3 years ago. I know.
They're a little too close to the truth there. And so Alexandre Dumas understood even back in 1844 that manipulating motivations while disguising your own. And Danglars is an effective leader in this scene. He's leading cavalry when he's
Yes.
leading Fernand by their own motivations.
He found the carrot to dangle.
Bing. Well, yeah, I mean, Danglars dangle. That's right. Particularly, I know, just put that together there myself. Particularly if you want to lead people to destruction.
One of the things actually that strikes me about this situation, and I think it's one of the things that makes me so angry, and why I feel like Dantes' revenge is probably as close to justice as you can get. But it also strikes me as relevant today. They're just mad that he's happy and successful.
Yes. Yeah.
And Danglars is not unsuccessful. That dude has probably, like what you said, a pretty coveted position, and is doing well. So it's like it comes back down to envy.
But you can never be too.
But Edmond is happier than I am, so he must have something that I don't. And because I don't see a way to improve my own
happiness
position, then I'm just going to destroy his. And that's one of those things I think that I've noticed since I was little, but was never able to articulate it. And it pisses me off. And I think where I see this today is when people start talking about like the 1%.
Yeah.
The 1%. They should have that money. They should be doing this. They should be doing that. We're like, you're telling a lot of people who have more money than you how they should spend their money. Maybe spend your energy going and figuring out how you want to make your money and stop looking at them. Now, and that's not to say, like, you and I, we like, there's unethical business practices all over.
Sure.
And I get that.
Sure.
But those are like the uber billionaires.
But even
there's plenty of people with millions of dollars who are running their businesses very well and very ethically and treating their workers well. And like, so talk about them too.
Right. Well, and even with sort of this idea of there's unethical businesses and things like that, or unethical business practices or things that are a little bit in the gray area, a little bit shady, whatever. Most of people's perceptions of wealth are driven by the people who have attained celebrity with that wealth. So
yeah.
Big example that is on everybody's lips all the time. We talk about him at least once on this podcast. Almost every single episode is Elon Musk.
It's Musk, yeah.
Please. Yeah. It's Musk. Because he puts himself out there. That's number one. But also number two. And we can't take this away from him. He takes risks that regular people wouldn't take. So for instance, in the current contre-Trump with Tesla around his compensation, he took no money from Tesla for 10 years. No salary. $0.
Now that I didn't know. That's not what they put in the articles.
Of course not, because the media people who get paid $80,000 a year can't conceive of working for 10 years for no money and literally pouring in, and you can argue with this, but pouring in 100 hours a week and sleeping on a factory floor in LA to make sure a car goes out the door. They can't conceive of doing their jobs that way. And so because their brain can't get there, they go back to, well, that guy doesn't deserve it because he's unethical. No. He may be engaged in an unethical practice. He may even be engaged in a practice that doesn't really go directly to be helpful for mental health or spiritual health or emotional health. We can make those kinds of critiques. I'm open to all of that.
Right.
But the critique of that guy doesn't deserve it because he somehow didn't put in the work, I'm not open to that critique.
No.
He put in the work. He did the thing you don't have the courage to do. I would like to see one of you.
Or you have more consideration for your mental well-being. That's
right. Or that's just not or just something you just don't want to do.
Yeah, that's fine too.
That's fine too. I'll take that too.
You got to be honest about that, right? Be like, no, I don't want to go sleep on the factory floor and work on a car for 100 hours. I just don't
never see my 10 children and have people chasing me around all the block for money all the time.
I'm good. If that's the only way, I'll find a different way to make $1 billion.
By the way,
if I really want $1 billion, I'll find a different way.
There's more than one way to make $1 billion. I mean, authors, writers, creatives, and by the way, there's another question that's buried inside of there that we don't even consider, which is this idea of, do we need $1 billion?
No, of course we don't.
And then after that, there's a sub question, which is, can you handle the responsibility and accountability that comes with $1 billion?
Nobody thinks about that. Nobody thinks about that. They think like, oh, if I had $1 billion, all of my problems would be gone. Be like,
no, you got $1 billion problems.
There's other problems with $1 billion. And what's making those billions of dollars? Like, case in point, Elon Musk, like everything he does, some people like and other people don't. Like it just
and everybody's got an opinion on how he should spend his money.
Yeah.
And so when he did the Twitter acquisition, the big knock against him was, "Ooh, you overspent $44 billion." I'm like, and I thought at the time, that's just a canard and snark. It doesn't mean anything. It's almost a cliche trope at this point. He bought it because it was laying around. If I had $44 billion laying around, I would have bought it too, because A, I know that guy's going to make me back my money, or I would have invested with that because A, I know that guy's going to make me back my money. B, I know he's absolutely bat crap crazy. And C, what you sometimes need. And C, I know that he's going to sleep on the floor for 100 hours a week to make it work for at least the first 2 years of it. And he's going to be up inside everybody's behind at that building in a way that the previous management wasn't. Done. Where do I sign up? Bet on that guy.
It reminds me of we have such a rose-colored perspective on stuff like and I read or used to read a ton of personal development books. So the big example of that was Ford, when he was having his engineers do the impossible and put that like single block engine together, or whatever technically the engineering miracle was that he was asking for. And it makes me wonder, like, if that was happening today, what would the reception be? It'd be like, oh, he's he's an idiot. He's abusing his engineers. He's driving them. He's slave drivers.
This is it. Yeah, no,
like,
that's like the engineers
then, like he did, like, but then we wouldn't have our cars.
So NASA, I'll use example NASA. NASA knew about rockets that were reusable and would land, would go up, straight up, turn around, land back or come back down and land on an ocean platform and be reusable again. They knew about that technology like 25, 30 years ago. NASA. The NASA engineers are not dumb. But, and we're going to talk about bureaucratic drift here in a little bit, because bureaucracy is huge in the first part of the Count of Monte Cristo. Bureaucrats don't innovate. They cannot. The bureaucratic mind looks at a technology like that and goes, nope, not going to do it.
Too risky.
Because not only too risky, but we have to maintain processes and systems here so that everybody can keep getting paid. This is the difference between gatekeepers and insurgents. Elon looked at that, and this is literally, and I don't disagree. I disagree with him. When he said this in an interview years ago, somebody asked him, how did you develop SpaceX? And he said, oh, I read a book on theoretical physics, and then I called NASA and I had like 3 meetings with them, and I realized they were morons, and I just would decide I was just going to go off and do it myself. Now I'm paraphrasing there, but that's literally like, that's not literally, that's a paraphrase of what he said. That was he went and had meetings. Let me just back this up a little bit. He went and had meetings with rocket scientists after reading a book about theoretical physics and rocket science. Sitting in the room with people and understanding that, okay, the knowledge that I have and the knowledge that they have are the same. And yet they're not doing this thing that is so obvious. I'm going to go do it. And the first knock against SpaceX was, to your point about Henry Ford and the block engine, when the engineers were putting together those rockets and getting off the shelf rockets from Russia, basically, because Russia wasn't using any of their rockets, and they had to reverse engineer. They literally brought in engineers from NASA, and they reverse engineered rockets from Russia because NASA wouldn't sell them any rockets, wouldn't sell SpaceX anything. They're like, oh, screw you guys. Kind of the way Nissan did with Tesla initially, when Tesla brought their battery technology to Nissan was like, get the hell out the door. You don't know what you're talking about. Right. Okay. bureaucracies.
Womp womp.
Womp, 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 right? Corporate bureaucracies, right? And so Elon goes, okay, well, we'll spend 100 hours a week figuring it out. He reverse engineered. Now, he didn't figure it out himself, but he knew enough to push the engineers in the direction where they needed to go on that technology. And the knock against SpaceX was the same knock against people at Tesla. They are spending too much time, and he's a slave driver. He's inhumane. But no one's asking you to go do this thing. You want to go be a journalist, go be a journalist. You want to work 40 hours a week and then go see your kids and like complain about stuff on the internet and watch a Netflix thing and then go flop into bed? Great, that's the thing. Be happy with that. But Danglars, it's like Danglars, can't be happy unless every journalists are particularly notorious for this, can't be happy unless everybody else is unhappy.
Hello. So I'm going to do some shilling here, and hopefully this will be a pause in our riveting conversation for you. I have an offer for you. My most recent book is 12 Rules for Leaders, The Foundation of Intentional Leadership. It's available in paperback, hardcover, or as an ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and any other place you order books. Now, in this book, I address the 12 leadership areas that I have found leaders need to be the most intentional in to be the type of leader followers actually want to follow. From establishing a foundation of leading teams through managing conflict effectively, all the way through leading teams through change, knowing what to do and why to do it can help readers, like the ones listening to this show, become better leaders. Look, reading this book and living it is like getting coaching from me directly without having to pay my full coaching rate. Head on over to leadershiptoolbox.us, that's leadershiptoolbox.us, and scroll down the homepage and click on the Buy Now button to purchase in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle format on Amazon 12 Rules for Leaders, the foundation for intentional leadership. And that's it for me. Now back to the show.
And I don't understand why.
Mindset. It's so like, it reminds me of the crabs.
Yes,
crabs in the bucket.
Crabs in the bucket.
Just like, whoa.
Revenge and manipulation. So
bringing it back around.
Yeah, bringing it back around. Why are those such powerful drivers for understanding people in literature? And why do leaders need to like be on the lookout for those as drivers? Or maybe a better question is this: how can leaders spot when someone on their team is jealous of them and wants what they have? Because this is not something where somebody walks up to you and goes, or very rarely does someone walk up to you and go, I think I have a consultancy where we do leadership development. I've been doing it for 12 years professionally and 20 years total. And I think I've only had a handful of times wherever I've had somebody walk up to me and they tell me, hey, XYZ person told me yesterday that they should have had my job. That's a handful of times. Most people don't have the courage to go do that to somebody else. So how do leaders spot that envy and that jealousy that might be a motivator on their team? Because I'm fascinated by this idea of negative motivators.
That's a difficult question to answer, I think, because the manifestation of the behaviors from the emotions is going to be different for everybody. So I could tell you how you could spot it in me. but I'm only one person, and
you're screaming across the opera room.
I mean, no, I mean, the passive aggressive behavior, I think, is a good one to look for. That seems like what am I trying to say? Like, a lot of people would do that, I think, from that seed of discontent or jealousy or envy. Yeah, the passive aggressive behavior would definitely be one of those things to look at. Kind of always, it's almost like miserly behavior as well.
Ooh.
Because it becomes to move back into personal development verbiage, scarcity versus
abundance.
Mindset, right? They like Danglars, right? Penny pinching every little thing. What's the other word? no, not nitpicking, but it's that kind
Mhm.
of that grasping, that like every little nitpick, like have to have every penny accounted for. And it comes from a place of I have to grasping,
Mhm.
right? So I think if you start to see some of that, and that could probably manifest in a couple of different ways. Um, um, well, I don't know. I don't know because I've never worked in like a corporate
Yeah,
um
corporate environment. Yeah.
environment before, but just my brain throwing out possible examples, like if you're assigning projects, particularly if there's like bonuses or commission involved, whoever is complaining that they didn't get more,
Yeah.
that would be the first person that I'd be like, all right, well, ask yourself why. Why didn't you get
Why didn't you
more?
get more?
Like, well, if you gave me more, then I could prove myself. Like, you got
Mm,
the company can't take that risk. You got to prove
right.
yourself before you get more. That's a mindset that I think we're losing, and it's very present in personal development entrepreneurship is this working without compensation
Mm,
with the idea that you will earn more later.
mhm.
That can be taken advantage of, and I think that's part of why people have this like they smart against it. Um, but
Yeah, it can be,
it's
but
there's like there's I feel like there's probably a middle ground that we can find.
well, I think the part of the middle ground there, and this is so I work a lot with startups, right? And the
Yes. Oh
classic,
gosh.
you know, you're going to eat beans and rice for X number of
Yep.
whatevers until like this thing happens, right? I'm
Yep.
currently in a startup right now myself, or an organization that's in startup mode where um I'm gonna have equity, whatever, but like whatever that means. But myself and this group of people who are together, there's like 14 or 15 of us together. None of us are getting paid out of this project.
Kind of in a startup right now. I forgot. I bought a business. I bought a music store that's kind of in startup mode right now
That's a startup
because
mode,
we're
yeah.
because we're recovering from COVID
Yeah.
and all just
The disease that shall not be named.
yeah.
Um,
I forget that I bought it. Like I just like it's
it's a
I
store. It's
did
fine.
that in November and then my baby came. It was just like
Yeah.
my
It's all
life
right.
is completely different now. It's fine.
Okay, it's fine. But you're going to experience the same thing in a small
Yeah,
business
I'm
where
not getting paid.
you're not going to get right. Right. Like I had to explain this one time to some employees of mine who were working with me. And I said, there are months where I do not take a salary from here so that the rest of you can get paid.
Mm-hmm.
And he stared at me in utter like
Mm-hmm.
disbelief,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the reason why those types of associations offend people, particularly people with a bureaucratic mindset. Like I remember back in 2010, it might have been, or maybe it was 2009, because it was the second administration. Yeah, and it started in Barack Obama's first administration, and then it took his second administration to actually implement it. But he began the push of this idea that internships, college internships, should be paid. Right? AOC runs around screaming about this, and it's this idea that, and this is the AOC line or the Barack Obama line, that my getting my experience shouldn't be for free or something like that.
Mm.
And I thought, you will get your money eventually.
Mm-hmm.
You're 20. The best thing you can do right now, when you have no children, no responsibilities, or minimal responsibilities, you're living. And I when I was 20, I think I made $8,000 in a year. You're living on the dole from somebody else. You just are at 20. What? Unless you're one of those outlier 20-year-olds that's like been hustling since you were like you're Warren Buffett, you've been hustling since you were like 8. Okay. You're outliers, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you're the vast majority, 98% of you are going to be living on the dole, what possible experience could you have that's worth paying for? And by the way, if you're a person who has to pay bills and you take on an internship that is for free, you better have done that risk versus reward thing in your head already. That's not my responsibility as the organization to do that thing for you. It's your responsibility to have done that thing. That's called free association. And when Obama's administration shifted the rules around internships to make them to basically penalize employers for doing unpaid internships, that was the death knell of, or not the death knell, the beginning of the death knell of what you're talking about, which is this idea that everyone, if they're in the market, should somehow be paid for something. And that's not true.
No, you have to be providing value.
Right. And you're not providing value just by showing up and being you. Mm-mm. That's not valuable. Like, we like to say it's valuable.
Start a YouTube channel and see how valuable that is.
This is true. Exactly. Like,
it's valuable for some people. Some people it works.
Right.
And those are usually the crazies.
Right. Or start a podcast like this podcast. Or like, we get a decent amount of downloads per month and a decent amount of downloads per week. We're not killing it. We will be in X number of years if we keep going on a particular path.
Right.
But this is the other thing. Like, it's 10 years to an overnight success.
Yep.
It's always 10 years. So you bought a music store, it'll be 10 years to climb out of COVID. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it'll be.
Yeah. And in the meantime, I have to figure out how to pay off that, financing.
That financing. Yes, yep. Exactly. And no one, and by the way, not one of the employees that you have, not one of the, or in the startup that I'm working with, not one of the founders that we're working with is going to be able to effectively sort of help us walk through that idea. And so you have to, and it was a real learning curve for me to figure that out. And that's the last gasp of the employee mindset. The last gasp of the employee mindset is the whining that, this is terrible and people don't love it. Why don't the people appreciate me? It's not fair. And you got to get rid of all that. You got to, because that's dead weight. None of that's helping you.
I go to Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con every year, and every year I end it with this panel by this editor who has been in the industry for decades, just decades. And the first thing, or the thing she says every year, because she free hands it, whatever it's called. She just goes. She just talks.
She just comes in and just writes on the whiteboard and starts talking.
Kind of, yeah. She's just talking, mile a minute. But the first thing she says is nobody owes you anything. Nobody owes you a sale. Nobody owes you a read of a sentence. Nobody owes you, like, if you want to put a comic out there, nobody owes you. Like, it's your job.
Right.
To make it, desirable, marketable, like people want to read it. You got to write something or draw something that people want to consume.
So this is a good segue into Penguin Random House and writers and AI. So AI, one of the things I really want to ask you about. So AI, large language algorithms, are here now. And in the fiction space where you are at,
thankfully they are still terrible.
They are horrible. They are horrible.
They're still terrible at the fiction thing.
They are, well, because
but that's honestly, I think, is only a matter of time.
You do really? I don't think they're ever going to get to the nuance of no. Here's where I think no. Here's what I think. I think there will be.
I read a lot of sci-fi, so yes, I think it's only a matter of time.
I know you do. Oh, I know you do. So I remember the line from it's from Moneyball that's like clipped and memed from Brad Pitt. Such a great movie where he says, there's the elite teams here, then there's 20 feet of crap, and then there's us. And you know what that 20 feet of crap is going to be? The AI produced fiction content. And we are going to, the algorithms and people who are looking to get rich quick all the way at the end of the long tail, at the furthest tippy tip of the long tail, and this is already starting to happen, are going to create content that will, to paraphrase from an essay I read in Boing Boing a couple of months ago, that will inshitify the internet, basically.
More.
You're a content creator, more than it already is, right? More. Now, I
shit on the internet.
Oh yeah, and then
go to Wattpad.
Just go to. I wasn't going to bring it up. I wasn't going to.
On which I will admit we are posting. Because hey, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. Like,
exactly.
You're not making any money. It's not
so
like.
How do people separate then the quality writing from the crap with AI? And if Penguin Random House isn't going to help you, because they're not going to help you.
They're not. No.
They're fighting for any foothold or toehold or fingernail hold they can maintain on an incredibly shrinking fat head.
Yeah.
Like, so So they're not going to help you. They're not going to publish your books. They're too busy publishing the Bible and Shakespeare until
Cows come home, whatever the phrase
or
is.
Jesus comes back, or the nuclear weapons
There you
fall, or the
go.
roaches come out, and all the insurance companies send out the final checks, and then they collapse. Like, this is what they're doing, right? And they plan on doing it all the way to the end, right? The bitter end, and it will be a bitter end. Which is why that merger was going to happen. So, how do we? Gosh, so many questions here. How do we take, like, the Count of Monte Cristo could probably work now in a serialized form, but it would have to be on YouTube with TikTok videos around it. And Dumas would have to come on and do a TikTok dance to promote it, which he probably would do that just fine. He would have to do a long form YouTube kind of thing. He'd have to have a long form YouTube show to support the Count of Monte Cristo. And then he'd have to go on a bunch of podcasts to support that. And it would be this whole marketing structure around this one little piece of content, which then, of course, would not allow him to scale the content because that's where his real talents and skills were, which is why certain people come along at certain times, right? But
you have just articulated our conundrum quite expertly.
Well, it is. Yes, it is the conundrum.
Yeah.
I write nonfiction business books. All nonfiction business books sell well over 80% of their copies in the first 6 weeks of release.
Wow.
Of their lifetime. So a business book like Napoleon Hill's Eat and Grow Rich, or Think and Grow Rich, or whatever, Think and Grow Rich, or Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. The reason why we still talk about Dale Carnegie and Napoleon Hill is because they came along at a time when you could sell to a literate public, and you could sell 100,000 copies, and then your legacy just grows like a mountain over time. But if you're publishing a book, a business nonfiction book in 2024, there's so much garbage. There's the elite, which is the Adam Grant, Malcolm Gladwell folks of the world. Then there's not 20 feet, there's 150 feet of garbage. And then there's you squirreling around the bottom like a roach, trying to figure out, that's me, squirreling around the bottom like a roach, trying to figure out how to get through the 150 feet of crap.
The roaches survive.
They do, and they eat a lot of crap.
Yes.
And that's why we have them. And so in the nonfiction business book space, it's vicious. No one ever talks about how few nonfiction books celebrities sell. No one ever talks about that, because it would be
biographies.
Oh, it would be embarrassing. Oh God, it would be embarrassing. Like Principles by Ray Dalio. I think the book came out 10 years ago now.
Oh, that was on my list for a while. Yeah, and I didn't buy it.
No, right. Nobody's read that book all the way through, and Ray Dalio knows it. Anyway, there's all kinds of scams that are done to get those books into the New York Times bestseller list.
Yes, I've heard about that. Yes, it's so frustrating. That New York best time, that doesn't mean anything.
Doesn't mean anything. It's a marketing thing, right? It's become a marketing thing. It used to mean something, but now it doesn't. But
I've heard of writers that will buy the 10,000 books themselves.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just to make sure that it gets to the New York Best Times. And then they give the copies away, and then they have that marketing. Yeah. Yeah,
exactly. But in fiction, I don't know what the rules are in fiction. I don't know. I don't know what the rules are in fiction. Like you said, you just wrote a trilogy. I presume you wrote it as a human being, not using AI.
Of course.
You've got the AI. And then you've got, which is going to create a problem for all the fiction writers.
Yeah.
And you even said it yourself. And then you've got the marketing, scheme around the book, right? And then you've got the fact that you might only sell 1,000 of these books.
That's not really an option for me. And I'm grateful that I worked as an entrepreneur and made no money for 10 years.
Yeah.
Because it's one of those things where I look back and I'm like, this is what all the shit was for.
Yeah.
I think. I've tried, what is it? Every 9 out of 10 businesses fail.
Oh yeah.
It's so I think that's what all the failure, what this was for. It's like, I'm just going to keep going until this book sells.
Right.
I'm not gonna stop. But I think you need that. And I think a lot of authors or aspiring writers just don't understand that that's the kind of mindset you need. Mm-hmm. Especially with this. I don't if we're probably going to self-publish first. We'll try that. I have a friend who is an expert and coaches people on, the SEO of Amazon. We're like, okay, we'll try that. If that doesn't work, we'll try something else. We're just going to keep trying. And I'm going to keep writing.
Right. Yeah.
Like, it's just like,
Well, and how do you?
and though I think one of the things is like, what keeps you going? It's like,
Yeah.
well, I would rather write than do most other things.
Mhm.
I grew up playing video games. I love video
Mhm.
games. And the tell for me was when I started, it was like, would I rather play Destiny right now or would I rather write? You're like, I'm gonna go write. I was like, whoa, that's weird. I never thought that would happen. Never ever would I have thought that I would be doing something work
Mhm.
related that I would rather do that would, because
Oh,
games are designed to feel rewarding,
right.
which is why we have such a massive intellect trapped in virtual worlds, which I think is the biggest shame.
Ready Player One exists for a reason, like that.
And
Ernest Cline nailed it in that first book. He did. He nailed it perfectly.
There's so much intelligence just stuck in video games right now. And that's not to say that there's nothing wrong with playing video games. I love video games, but man, if we could figure out how to get them a little bit of confidence and get that problem solving mindset that is just
Well,
inherent in all video game playing to solve the problems of the world.
well, and
Oof.
this is my concern with AI, because my concern with large language algorithms is not necessarily on the creative end and the
Oh yeah, that's what we were
craftification
talking
of
about.
content end. It's not necessarily that, but it is this idea that, because this is already starting to happen, we're going to take the data pattern recognition process of an LLM. We're going to put that machine next to the machine of virtual reality, the VR machine, and of course, because it's two algorithms talking to each other, they're going to pattern recognition and solve for each other all the way out to the logical end. And my concern is not that we're going to have a Terminator thing where the AI jumps out into the physical thing and starts shooting people, although that very well may be a thing. I think Google's working on that on the side. For sure. I think they're definitely working on that in Mountain View. What's far more insidious to me is what Mark Zuckerberg's working on with Meta, where we're going to make the thing so good in here you never leave. That's Ready Player One.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is far more possible. And that creates the dystopia that you saw in that book, where everybody's living in, trailers that are stacked one on top of each other somewhere in Oklahoma, hooked up to these, machines. And that's why I think, and that's why I do this podcast, is like, it doesn't, and that's why I write books that nobody reads or very few people. And it's why I do workshops that a very small number of people attend. And it's why I've done this kind of work for the last number of double-digit years, because it's actually not about the number of people that I impact. It's less about that. And it's more about the fight for gatekeeping quality. And that's a fight worth having. Yeah. And I become an insurgent by gatekeeping quality.
That's fascinating,
enough.
Right?
Weirdly enough.
It was just, yeah. No, when you were talking about that, it reminded me of your notes about motivations. Yes. And, we only do things for two reasons: to move towards pleasure or move away from pain. Yeah. At the base level, that's what it all comes down to. It's very binary.
Very binary.
Move towards pleasure, move away from pain. And that, when you made the comments about Meta, it's like that's already kind of what they do. Is it's all designed like to stimulate the pleasure centers of your brain, or the addictive centers, both, so that you don't want to leave. You'll just keep scrolling forever.
Right.
And it's not just Facebook. All of them have done that, because they make their money the longer you're on the platform.
Right. Exactly. Well, and the dynamic, and we'll go back to the Count of Monte Cristo here in just a second, because I want to talk about bureaucracy. The dynamic of a company like Meta, because it's a giant bureaucracy. I think they have 50,000 employees. Wow. Google has 100. I think Google has 190,000 last time I heard. That's a small country, right? That's
country. Yeah,
that's a small country. When you have these CEOs that are running small countries that are getting paid $50,000 a month, they're not incentivized to be insurgents. They're incentivized to make sure that whatever the hell is happening here keeps happening. So everybody's fat, or at least moderately fat. And if not happy, at least moderately happy, and keeps the machine going. Because if this machine doesn't keep going, the stockholders, the shareholders, the folks who buy stock, the folks who are employees, the folks who are on the board, the folks who are in the audience, the folks who are the customers, all these folks will be impacted in a negative way. Whether that negative way is just right.
That's the word.
Right, exactly. And so you've got a bureaucratic mindset doesn't just exist in government, although we're going to see this in Count of Monte Cristo with this bureaucrat that we're about to introduce to the audience here. But we see it now in corporations, and we've been here for a while, since at least the mid-20th century. And I think people are starting to wake up to the game. I think COVID did a lot to wake people up to the game, more so than probably anything else that has happened in the last 100 years of America. Back to the Count of Monte Cristo in just a moment. We're not going to read all of this chapter, but it is called The Interrogation. And the interrogation of Edmond Dantes, because he is arrested based on this letter that Fernand actually delivers, not Danglars, interestingly enough, which is, again, what Danglars wanted. He didn't want his fingerprints on the murder weapon. And so Dantes gets arrested, and the person who is interrogating him is a gentleman named Gerard de Villefort. And Gerard de Villefort, there we go. Yes, I can't get the Villefort. There's a buddy of mine who speaks French, and he sort of, anyway, Villefort. Okay, no.
The more important part is that the double L is not L. It's
okay.
E, like it's V for
Villefort.
There you go.
Like you got a heart on the back of your throat.
Yeah.
Villefort. And he is at a betrothal of his own, and this is the play that Dumas does with Villefort and Edmond. I'm not going to tell it. And Dantes, and he plays off this idea that both gentlemen are approaching. We just mentioned this earlier. Happiness, right? They're approaching their peak of happiness, and now they have to have an unfortunate engagement with each other. So we'll read selections from this chapter, because it is a long chapter. There's a lot involved here, but there's a couple of different ideas I want to pull out from here. So we'll start off here. Hardly had de Villefort left the dining room, then he had put off. It's getting worse and worse pronunciation as I go along, kids. So just batten down the hatches. Then he put off his joyful mask to take on the serious mien of one called upon to exercise the supreme office of pronouncing on the life of his fellow man. However, despite the mobility of his expression, something which the deputy had studied more than once, as a skilled actor does in front of his mirror, on this occasion it was an effort for him to lower his brow and darken his features. In reality, apart from the memory of his father's choice of political allegiance, which, if he did not himself completely renounce it, might affect his own career, Gerard de Villefort was at that moment as happy as it is possible for a man to be. At the age of 26, already wealthy in his own right, he held a high office in the legal profession, and he was to marry a beautiful young woman whom he loved, not with passion, but reasonably, as a deputy crown prosecutor may love. Apart from her beauty, which was exceptional, his fiancée, Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran, belonged to a family which was among those most highly thought of at court in this time. And besides the influence of her mother and father, who, having no other children, reserved it entirely for their son-in-law, she was, in addition, bringing her husband a dowry of 50,000 écus, which, thanks to her quote-unquote expectations, that dreadful word invented by marriage brokers, might one day be increased by a legacy of 500,000. The reason I'm reading this is because we in our time marry for love, right? We don't marry for any other reasons. Anyway, he's hustling his way over to the office to have a conversation. He's waylaid a little bit by the ship's owner, Monsieur Morel. And, well, Villefort, sits down once he has a conversation with Morel, basically indicating that he will do his duty no matter what else happens. And then he meets Dantes. First impressions had been favorable to Dantes, but Villefort had often heard it said as a profound political maxim that one must be aware of first impulses, even when they were correct. And he applied this rule on impulses to his impressions without taking account of the difference between the two terms. So he's a bit of a midwit. He thus stifled the good instinct that was attempting to invade his heart, and from there to attack his mind, settled his features in front of the mirror into their grandest expression, and sat down, dark and threatening, behind his desk. A moment later, Dantes entered. The young man was still pale, but calm and smiling. He greeted his judge in a simple but courteous manner, and looked around for somewhere to sit, as though he had been in the shipowner Monsieur Morel's drawing room. It was only then that he met Villefort's dull gaze, that look peculiar to men of the law who do not want anyone to read their thoughts and so make their eyes into unpolished glass. The look reminded him that he was standing before justice, a figure of grim aspect and manners. Who are you and what is your name? Villefort asked, leafing through the notes that the officer had given him as he came in, which, in the past hour, had already become a voluminous pile, so quickly does the amount of reports and information build up around that unfortunate body known as detainees. My name is Edmond Dantes, monsieur, the young man replied in a calm voice and ringing tones. I am the first mate on board the vessel Pharaon, belonging to Messieurs Morel and Son. Your age? Villefort continued. 19. What were you doing at the time of your arrest? I was celebrating my betrothal, monsieur, Dantes said, his voice faltering slightly. So sharp was the contrast between those moments of happiness and the dismal formalities in which he was now taking part, and so much did the somber face of Monsieur de Villefort enhance the brilliance of Mercédès' features. You were at your betrothal feast, said the deputy, shuddering in spite of himself. Yes, monsieur. I'm about to marry a woman whom I have loved for the past 3 years. Though usually impassive, nevertheless, Villefort was struck by this coincidence, and the emotion in the voice of Dantes, whose happiness had been interrupted, sounded a sympathetic chord with him. He too was to be married. He too was happy, and his own felicity had been disturbed, so that he might help to destroy that of a man who, like himself, was on the brink of happiness. This philosophical analogy, he thought, would cause a great stir when he returned to Mademoiselle de Saint-Marin's salon. And while Dantes waited for his next question, he was already mentally ordering the antithesis around which orators construct those sentences designed to elicit applause, but which sometimes produce the illusion of true eloquence. They go through the interrogation. Villefort asks him a bunch of questions and then takes the letter from his pocket. That is the letter that Danglars wrote and offered it to Dantes, who examined it. His face clouded, and he said, this is a little bit later in the chapter, No, monsieur, I do not know this handwriting. It is disguised, yet it has an appearance of sincerity. In any case, the writing is that of an educated hand. He looked at Villefort with such gratitude. I'm happy to find myself dealing with a man such as you, because my rival is indeed a true enemy. From the flash that passed through the young man's eyes as he spoke those words, Villefort was able to perceive how much violent energy was hidden beneath his mild exterior. Come then, said the deputy prosecutor, answer my questions honestly, not as an accused man to his judge, but as one wrongly accused might answer another who has his interests at heart. How much truth is there in this anonymous accusation? And Villefort threw the letter which Dantes had just given back to him onto the desk with a gesture of distaste. Now, that's the letter, or the cover of the letter. And, well,
then there's the letter that Dantes.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Was given by the captain to deliver in Paris.
Yes.
And this is where, you're asking about the bureaucracy, and I think Villefort really does use the bureaucracy to his advantage here, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
But it's still a matter of self-interest. Oh, sorry. For those of you who've not read Count of Monte Cristo, Villefort, the letter is addressed to Noirtier, who is Villefort's father.
That's right.
Noirtier is a Bonaparte supporter, and Villefort is working very hard to disassociate himself with his father's political leanings. And so I think one of the chapters, Villefort just straight up meets the king.
Yep.
So
He's headed. Yep.
he's working real hard to
He goes right to
establish
Paris.
himself with the new monarchy, or the old reestablished monarchy, whatever. And so Edmond Dantes now presents a threat to all of Villefort's hard work. And instead of being a cool guy, he just screws Edmond Dantes over, and he's like, you can go just disappear in prison because that will save my reputation and all of my hard work.
Now, why was Napoleon a problem?
I mean,
For those of us who don't know, why was Napoleon a problem? Why was that guy a little bit of a challenge for folks in Europe at that time?
I feel like you could probably answer it better than I could. The other, like, side note, the other books that I've been reading are, it's called the Temeraire novels by Naomi Novik. They're also set in the Napoleon era, but it's fantasy. It's historical fantasy. It's a lot of fun, but it's just interesting. We're like, oh, I forgot this was set during the Napoleon era. It's like, dang, okay, just Napoleon everywhere.
Well, and so Napoleon was, you're right, I can answer this question, you're correct. So Napoleon, you're exactly correct.
Be like,
well,
I have vague memories of my history lessons.
Yeah. And so this novel, or the Count of Monte Cristo, the events of Count of Monte Cristo, occur at a time when Napoleon is he's at his first exile to Elba.
Yes.
And so the folks on the monarchists on the continent, specifically in France, don't know if he's going to mount a return, which he would actually mount a return. And then there would be 100 days where he would basically rampage across Europe, and then he would be put back in a box and shipped off as far away as they could possibly manage to ship him off. Because I'm really curious as to why they didn't send him to like North America. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Point is, they were going to put him in a box and send him away, right? And that gap between him being defeated at the Battle of Waterloo and then being exiled, and then coming back, that gap of time, there's a lot of turmoil in France, particularly around Paris. You see that in the chapter where Villefort goes and runs off and goes and sees the king, to your point. And at that point, everybody's trying to make their own separate deals. Everybody's trying to appeal to the king, or not the king, at least the monarch.
Everybody's trying to ensure their place.
Correctamundo, that's right. There's a lot of what we call in modern terms jostling for political position. And Dantes is the classic guy. He's the term that we use nowadays, particularly on Substack and other places, is normie. He's a normie. I was
going to say ingenue, but that's usually for women.
Ingenue is for women, normie is for dudes. Yeah. He's your average video game playing dude who just wants to get married and go back to work. Right. He doesn't know who Joe Biden is. He doesn't have an opinion about Donald Trump. He doesn't even know who his own mayor is. He's just there you go. Right. Yep. I just want to hang out and go, I don't know, I want to go to work. And he's
marrying a pretty girl.
Right. I just want to marry the girl, pay the bills.
He got promoted early.
Right. I'm 19. I got a promotion. Wow. I don't want to die fat and old. And by the way, I'll be fat and old if I'm lucky by the time I'm 30. Come on. Right. He's almost a man with no, I won't say no motivation. He's almost a man with no, I'll frame it this way. Dumas has created, the author, Alexandre Dumas, created a character upon whom he could paint anything. And he painted this revenge story on Dantes because of the situation that he was surrounded in. And so I think there's a warning actually in here for all of the normies. And the warning is, and this is where bureaucratic self-interest comes in and its discontents. If the bureaucrat decides that it's self-serving to reach down and get you, and by the way, you're done. I mean, you see this in Night by Elie Wiesel. We covered the Gulag Archipelago last year by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Like, if you're engaged in just living out your life, the system, and we talk a lot about this today in our culture, the system will find a way to get you if the system wants you.
Oh, that reminds me of this. kind of
Yeah,
a
go ahead.
weird example, but I play a lot of board games, and
Yeah.
my favorite board games are the ones where I can just sit on my side of the board and do my thing. And, I'm like, oh, cool, I'm getting my points, blah, blah, blah. And as soon as somebody comes over to fuck with me, I'm like, leave me alone. Why are you bothering me? I'm just happy over here. And it's like, well, it's because it's part of the game.
Right.
But that happens in life.
That happens in life. It's all part of the game. One of my favorite shows on HBO the last 25 years was and it's not on anymore, but I recommend everybody watch it. You can find it on HBO Max, the app. The Wire. You should watch all 3 seasons of The Wire. Talk about brilliant writing that hangs together. It's genius. It takes the cop and robbers or cop and versus drug dealers sort of trope, puts it in Baltimore, and then takes it to its next level. And the writing is so clean and clear and amazing. And there's a character in there who robs other drug dealers named Omar.
Okay.
And that's how he makes his living. He walks out down the street with a shotgun and a big black trench coat, and all the drug dealers on the corners know, and they scream out, Omar's coming, and they scatter. He robs drug dealers. And so in the course of the series, eventually the prosecution who wants to prosecute these drug dealers calls him as a witness. Now he's doing it self-servingly because he wants to get revenge on some people who hurt him and hurt some people close to him. But the prosecution is fine with using him to accomplish their own means because they work for the state. The bureaucracy, again. And this little bureaucratic lawyer is questioning this Omar. and he asks, and there's a sequence, beautiful sequence, season 4 or 5 of The Wire, where he basically asks Omar, you steal with, you rob drug dealers. Why should we believe anything that you say here? You take a shotgun and you rob people. And he goes, and Omar says, you do the same thing just with a suitcase. And it turns it on that bureaucratic lawyer, and the lawyer's like, his mouth drops open because he has nothing to say. And everybody in the court laughs. And then Omar owns it. And then a couple more beats go by. And, the prosecutor asks him after he pulls himself back together, he asks him, how is it that a man like this has survived this long? Or you have survived this long? Because if you're robbing drug dealers, your life expectancy is minimal at best. And so he says, well, it's all in the game. You either play or you get played. That's how it goes. And this is the thing I think in life that normal people miss. They don't realize the games they're in, or they think the games they're playing don't have any long-term consequences. Like they can't project those out.
Yeah.
And so yes, most normal people play life like that board game, like the way you play board games. They just want to be left alone in the corner and leave me alone. And if you come over here and mess with
building
me,
my city.
I'm gonna build my city. And you're not allowed to be left alone because the bureaucrats want to come over and mess with you.
Knock over your sandcastle.
That's right. And they're doing it, and this is the counterpoint I always think of. They're doing it for duty, like before, they're doing it for duty, or they're doing it for other self-serving reasons, or they're doing it to win their own game that they're in. And you don't know the rules of their game, but because they've been set in position and hierarchy over you, they know your game. And if there's one thing I would recommend for leaders who think of themselves as being quote unquote normal or ingenues, or naive, I would recommend that it might be a good idea to learn what kind of games other people are playing on other boards. Might be a really good idea to learn those games.
Write this down.
Well, you're going to see it. You're going to see it in the music store that
I already have.
Yeah, like that's a totally different game.
Yeah.
And you've got to. I'm presuming you've got.
Thankfully, I know one of the games. Because I was.
But there's so many other games that then open up, right?
Yeah.
Because like there's you're in California. I won't say where, but you're in California. So like you've got the inspection game, the bureaucrats and the regulators that show up and want to produce literally nothing but paper. That's literally their job, just to produce paper, not to provide value, just produce paper so they can keep getting a job. And if you irritate any of those people, they won't give you a piece of paper that you need in order to run this business, which is brutal and vicious. But that's
Mhm.
only one game. Then you've got
Mhm.
like the California Taxing Authority game, which is a totally different game. And then you've got the IRS game, which is that's a totally different game. And then you've got like the game of actually going to your customers. Your customers don't care about any of those other games you're playing.
Nope.
And then you've got your employees who are a totally different game, and they don't care about any of those other games you're playing. And this is the challenge of entrepreneurship, but it's also the challenge of
Leadership.
Of leadership. Yeah.
I have like my friend group in general just doesn't, they're like, do CEOs deserve how much they get paid? And sometimes I'm like,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah. Like,
I just not.
we can argue about the ethics of like how much their raises have gone up and how much their workers are like, yeah, the CEOs can't do their thing if they don't have their workers in the beehive making the
Right.
thing. But like they're thinking about so much. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, they deserve to make a lot of money. A lot of money because nobody else wants to do that.
They deserve it unless you're like the Boeing's. I don't want to say unless. And if you're the CEO of Boeing, where the door falls off your plane
You
in the
deserve to
middle
get
of the
fired.
air, right? You've got to be the first leader that falls on the grenade
Yes.
when the screw up happens.
And I think that's the big issue is our like, well, I don't know. I was about to say a blanket statement, but I think something that people are not seeing in CEO leadership is that they're not willing to fall on the grenade for their companies. They're not willing to, it's just a paycheck. It's all very like mercenary.
Transactional.
Yeah. And so the passion, what is it? Vision or whatever, right? The buy-in of the company's mission. It's not actually there. They don't actually care.
Well, and you see this
for
also
a lot of the big ones, right? I think there are some smaller, still maybe like lots of revenue, but smaller companies where the CEOs like they'll take the hit. One of the CEOs that I hear about occasionally is like the CEO of Costco and like how little he makes and how much like he does to really build that company and make sure it's good for their workers too. And it's just like, damn, that's how it's done.
Well, and it's really interesting. So if you ever have an opportunity to, in the local area you're in, if you ever have an opportunity to go to like a small business mixer with other small business leaders who are leading their businesses, it's interesting because you see this at a micro level versus seeing it at you see it at a macro level versus a micro level. But what you see is when you wind up, or what you experience when you wind up talking to folks, and I've been to a lot of those mixers and summits and conferences and things like that in my time, in running like the 3 or 4 businesses that I've run. It's you wind up in a space where you look at what that person's doing and leading in that particular way, even if it's parallel to you. And the first thing you think is, well, that's fine for that person. I would never do that. And you walk away. Because you're like, I can't sit here and critique you because I know how hard what you're doing is, and you know how hard what I'm doing is.
Yeah.
So there's actually no critique here. It's just you found a different solution than the solution that I found. So if you're at
parenting.
Right. Now, one of the things that I push on very often, just like in parenting, is there has to be a standard at some level. Like we have to say that there's a baseline of ethics or a baseline of whatever, right? And we see this in the Count of Monte Cristo. There has to be a baseline of some behavior here that we all socially agree on. But then after we get past the baseline, and by the way, my big problem is the baseline is being and has been destroyed. That's my big problem.
Yeah,
but
we've been working on disintegrating that, and now it's just crumbled. It's just like we have no baseline.
Right, we've deconstructed it out of existence.
Yeah,
that doesn't work though, because now you're just floating around. And if you're just floating around, whether you're a corporate, whether you're a big public company like a Boeing or a Meta, which we've mentioned, or any of Musk's companies, big public companies, or you're a small business, there's no baseline standard that unites you, and so anyone can do anything anywhere. And you're at that mixer, you're listening to this person talk, or you're having a canapé or whatever, some hors d'oeuvre that you didn't want to eat, and you're going, I would never do that way. but you're still hamstrung in that sense of not being able to critique that person, because guess what? If you do, they're going to start poking on you. And this is where we get to the idea that it doesn't matter what you're doing. It only matters the result, because the result is the thing that can never be argued against. And so if the result is, well, I gave all of my employees $50,000 bonuses last year and you gave none of your employees any and you're almost in debt, then you go, well, you win the day. Congratulations, you won.
Yeah.
I guess you won. And this is the thing I think we're struggling with in the United States right
Yeah.
now. Chaos. I'm going to ask you a question about chaos here as we round the corner. Because in a chaotic time, like in The Count of Monte Cristo, where like no one knows what's happening, and we are in a weird. This has been one of the things on this podcast this year, is that we're in a moment. I think we're at the end of chaos. I think we're in the back end of chaos. And
I hope so.
Oh, and the reason why I say this is because usually chaos comes in 20-year cycles. We've been in a 20 to 25-year cycle of chaos since 2001. Next year will be 25 years of 24 years, 25 years of chaos. We're almost done. We're almost out the other side. Now, usually at the back end of chaos, there's a last sort of explosion of nonsense, which may happen, internationally, may happen internally, may happen in November, whatever, right? There's a last, but usually that's the last thing. It's like a rat that's trapped and makes its one last like lunge and then it's done, right? Yeah. So we're not in the last lunge moment, but the last lunge moment is coming. And then what's on the other, and this podcast this year has been consumed with what's on the other side of that last lunge. Because I'm less interested in the last lunge of chaos, and I'm more interested in what happens when, okay, now we're done with that.
That's so interesting.
And now we're going to do something else.
When you were talking about, I'm sorry, I can't even remember what you're talking about, but chaos was the chaos, your examples of chaos.
Yeah.
One of the things that started kind of playing in my head was that montage in V for Vendetta, if you've seen it. When like it's like right after V has sent out all of the masks. And there's that montage of chaos in the UK. And just even the anarchy in the UK, and the guy shoots the gun in the air. And that's what it reminded me of. But then your point just now is like, what comes after that? Because that's where the movie ends. They're just like, we blew up Parliament. Hooray! The good guys won. And we're like, what happens next? Like,
right. How do we rule? Right.
Nobody thought about that. The one guy that might have thought about it is now dead.
Well, this is my problem with revolutionary movements, because sometimes the dog catches the car. So I already mentioned, before we started the podcast, I mentioned the Joker in a different kind of context in The Dark Knight. And my challenge with many revolutionary movements, I don't care whether they're Marxist from the left or whether they're, Proud Boys or the Patriot Front or whoever from the right, I don't care. Political revolutionary movements, social revolutionary movements, cultural revolutionary movements, deconstruction, which is a philosophy from Derrida, all of this stuff. What happens? I always ask the diversity, equity, and inclusion people, what happens after you have a diverse, equity, or equitable and inclusive world? And of course, the response to that always is, well, hey, son, we'll never get there. Oh, okay. So what you're telling me, you're going to have never-ending chaos and never-ending revolution. And by the way, when you say that conclusion, everybody walks away. And the reason why everybody walks away and has nothing to say is because the thing that destroys in a revolution is not the same thing as the thing that builds. No. And it's time. I will say this. I personally have had enough of destruction, and it is time for building.
Yeah.
I've had enough of destruction. So are there going to be deconstruction or whatever fancy term? We've been deconstructing since 2 planes flew into the towers in the World Trade Center in 2001. We've been deconstructing ever since then. We've had 25 years of deconstruction. Stop deconstructing. Yeah.
What are we
Start constructing. Right.
The thought that came to me was that the answer to your question is like, well, we don't know what we want, but it's not that. Right. We spend so much time criticizing the thing that is that we know we don't want. So we're not spending any energy or time on like, what would we do instead?
Okay, so we were talking about Disney, and we were talking about the writing on Star Wars a little bit before we started this podcast. You're writing a fictional science fiction trilogy, and putting that out into the world. So this is our last question as we round the horn, literally, as we come around and bring it around. What are we going to build in the future? Because Dumas in The Count of Monte Cristo, he's building something for the future. He's building a myth. Right? He's building something that other people will be able to. He wasn't deconstructing tropes. He was building tropes. He was building cliches. He was putting something into the world, right? As a creator, and this is why I love having you on and talking about this kind of stuff. As a creator, how do we build past Disney, past X-Men, past MCU, past Star Wars?
So my thought is like, I'm so tired of lazy writing and lazy world building. I'm going to go build my own world that is going to have all of the passion and thought and care and love that I grew up reading. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm going to go. I'm going to go create that. And if hopefully it sells, and if it doesn't, I don't know, I'm just going to push it until it does. Mm-hmm. There's not really any room in my mind for like, eventually people like me who maybe are still like, please get better. Mm-hmm. I haven't thrown in the towel yet, are going to find my world and they're going to be starving for it. And I think, and I don't, and here's the other thing. I know competition is a thing, mm-hmm. but I would love it if there were like 10, 20, however many other writers go and do the same thing. Like there's room. My world is going to be different from your world. Go build your own world. Make it good. Take the time. Don't be in a rush. Like just let it marinate, make a good thing. And it's hard. Do the hard thing. We want the easy out, right? We're like, ChatGPT, let it write it for me. It's like, no, ChatGPT can be a useful tool, mm-hmm. but it's not going to write your book. It's not going to build your world in like you said, with any substance. Mm-hmm. So go make your own thing. If you're unhappy with that, think about like, hey, what would you do instead? What would you do better? And then go do it. Don't just talk about it. Be like, haha, yeah, that would be cool if that existed. You had the thought, go make it. Because the way you're going to make it is going to be different from how I would make it. And then suddenly, if we both put in the time and the effort and the, the passion, then we have 2+ very high quality fantasy worlds. And just like people are going to eat it up. And eventually, this is where I'm the idealist, naive. If everything was roses, eventually Hollywood will be so starving for good content, then they're going to come to us. And they'll be like, hey, you have good writing. And I'll be like, yes. And I will continue to be involved. And I'm not taking your contract until you like, here's the other thing. We need more people who can't be bought. We want to criticize so much of like people who have a ton of money without realizing that like we're just waiting for our chance to have that much money, except especially for artists, we need things that there's no figure. You cannot pay me enough to turn Urda into Star Wars. Urda, sorry, is the name of my world. URDA. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to let you do that. I think about this all the time when I'm fantasizing. So like, which director would I trust pretty much implicitly with my work? And I think I have one, and his name is Guillermo del Toro. And because that guy is picky. And when they wanted to make Pacific Rim 2, he was like, nah.
Yeah, I don't need that.
I'm not going to do it. And so they made it without him. And guess what? It was...
It was exactly what you would expect.
Yeah. Yeah. But Guillermo del Toro is just such a fantastic storyteller. If you didn't watch his Pinocchio that came out on Netflix, that was amazing.
Okay, so let me ask you the counter question to this, which I always get from people. How do I survive the 10 years, because I gotta eat and I need somewhere to live. Give me practical steps on how I survive while I'm building this thing that maybe at the end of that 10 years, no one will care
pay
about.
off,
Might
right?
pay
That's
off,
true.
but more likely than not, no one will care about. So how do I live?
Well, so right. It's like, it depends on what you want. Do you want to survive or do you want to be happy on the journey? So like what I love about my writing is that I love this process.
Yeah.
If I get to the end and it never makes me a dime, I'm like, well, I had fun. Right. So
what else would I have done with my time?
Exactly. I had fun. It's out there. It's alive. Maybe my kids will pick it up and be like, "Hey, Mom wrote this cool book. We're gonna publish it for her."
That's right.
Like maybe
Yeah.
I don't know how this is gonna shake out. All I know is I'm having a blast. I love what I'm doing. I love collaborating with my co-author. Like, and that the journey is the thing anyway. At the end, if I make $1 million, cool. At the end, if I make $10, cool. Like, whatever, because it's not about that ultimately.
Yeah.
And so, how do you pay the bills? I think I got lucky. I have multiple passions. So like I was teaching music in a pretty affluent area. So it's a fairly cushy job.
Well,
working, like, it's hard work. It is.
Yeah.
I love my students.
Yeah.
Right. I think maybe not, I shouldn't say I got lucky, because then, everybody's like, well, she's a special unicorn. I can't do that. You got to figure out how to enjoy whatever process. One will make you money. And then one is the long-term one, or one will pay the bills. Right. That's what my voice teaching kind of always was. And again, that's not to say that I cared very deeply about my students, and taking this summer off to stay home with my daughter was actually a very difficult decision. But yeah,
right.
I think people have that in them. They've, or at the very least, they've got a way to find a job that's at least not soul sucking.
Right.
Because if it's just a job that you show up and you do the thing and it doesn't take a lot of mental or emotional energy, then you have that mental emotional energy to do your side thing, to create. That's how you do it.
Well, and when you show up to do that job, and this is something, this is how I solve that conundrum. When I show up to do that job, and I even use this to solve this conundrum today, or this idea, I'm in that 8 hours or 4 hours or whatever it is that I'm giving to that employer. I'm not over there with whatever the thing is that I'm building. I'm here with you, but I'm a partner in this. I'm not your employee. And partner means if I don't like what you're doing, I'm free to leave. I'm also free to set the terms of what I will do, what I won't do, not in a way that disrespects you or the business, but in a way that respects what you've built and respects who I am. Now, if we can come to some détente or rapprochement about that, great, we can work together. But if we can't, I'm not for you as an employer, and that's okay. The world always needs more bartenders. I can hear
people saying that's a very idealistic way of you have to pay the bills, and desperation was what came to mind. But I think there's this belief or this fear that you can't find that.
Right. And you can't.
So you have to keep looking. It might take a while to find.
Yeah.
But you can find it.
Oh, yeah. Well, and COVID shifted around everything when the employer to employee relationship in ways that are dramatic that I would not have anticipated. And what we now have is people who are putting in the bare minimum at the employee level, and it shows. And that damages what the employer is able to offer. We see this particularly in the restaurant industry. That damages what the employer is able to offer as a service, which, by the way, if you don't offer a better service, you cannot make more money and thus raise the boat. Right. And so the symbiotic relationship, the deal, to paraphrase from Darth Vader, has been altered.
This deal's getting worse and worse all the time.
This is a very fine deal, and I'll take it. If you haven't seen the bit on Robot Chicken, you need to see that
it's
bit.
hilarious.
Oh my gosh, it's hilarious. I used to use that line back in the day when I was leading larger teams because like, careful, I don't alter the deal. Just be careful. And one of my employees was a huge Star Wars fan. He would always laugh. I was like, just don't laugh because I might alter the deal. And you're
Star
still
Wars Robot Chicken was hysterical.
It was hysterical.
Yeah.
My point is, by the way, a show that could never get made today, or
right.
Or the Boondocks. Like I've been seeing Boondocks clips floating. They're now floating around among the Gen Zers on Instagram. It's kind of interesting to see like this is floating up from the cultural zeitgeist. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Y'all looking for quality, aren't you? There you go. But I think that you can get there, but that symbiotic relationship has been broken. Mm-hmm. And again, that's part of the chaos piece. And so it's how do we rebuild that symbiotic relationship? It's how do we build new structures on the other side? I don't need to hear any more about how we break them apart because we figured that part out.
Right.
How do we rebuild that symbiotic structure? So if
it's going to take the leaders. The leaders have to do it. Leaders have to go first.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Yep. It's going to take the leaders. All right. Well, we haven't really resolved anything here, but that's okay.
That's
fine. That's fine. We read some things from the Count of Monte Cristo. I strongly, heartily recommend you either get the unabridged version or the abridged version, whichever version. They're both great.
Whichever one you have time for.
Whichever one you have time for in your day. We will have Christen back on when I finally power through to the end of my unabridged version of the Count of Monte Cristo. But I would like to thank Christen for coming on our podcast today. And of course, when Belle of the Bow comes out, we'll have her on to talk about that. I can't wait to see that new project come into the world. And I look forward to hearing more from her about this. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast today, Christen. It was great.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a blast.
All right. And with that, well, folks, we're out.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And now that you've made it this far, you should subscribe to the audio version of this show on all the major podcast players, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, YouTube Music, and everywhere else where podcasts are available. There's also a video version of our podcast on our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the Leadership Toolbox channel on YouTube. Just search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button there on YouTube. And while you're doing that, leave a 5-star review if you like what we're doing here on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Just go below the player and hit 5 stars. We need those reviews to grow, and it's the easiest way to help grow this show. And tell all your friends, of course, in leadership. By the way, if you don't like what we're doing here, well, you can always listen to another leadership show. There are several other good ones out there. At least that's what I've heard. All right. Well, that's it for me.